Welcome to On My Way to Wealth, the podcast where busy Gen Xers can learn financial tips as they navigate life on their way to wealth. And now, please join your host, Luis Rosa.
Hello and welcome to another episode of On My Way to Wealth. My name is Luis and I'm your host. Happy New Year, everyone. This is episode 50, which is a great milestone for the On My Way to Wealth podcast. So thank you all for your support. Really appreciate it. I hope you had a happy, safe New Year and I wish you the best in 2021. And speaking of which, I wanted to kind of build a little bit on my last episode, talked about some resolutions, but I wanted to talk to you about how to start the year off right. And a lot of that has to do with mindset. So you hear these common phrases sometimes like, oh, set it and forget it, and out of sight, out of mind. And some of that stuff could be applied to your finances, and they work to some degree. But I do have a bit of an observation, a little bit of an objection to the saying, set it and forget it, which is why I titled this episode, Set It, but Don't Forget It, because there are certain things that you don't necessarily want to run on autopilot without you checking in to see if they're working. So obviously, I do believe in automating things like your finances and things of that sort, which we'll get into, but there has to be an aspect of intention behind it, some conscious action to make sure that things are working, to make sure that if they're not working, then you can change course, right? So let's talk about it. It's really more about being intentional. Instead of letting life happen to you, instead of just reacting to what comes your way, you want to be intentional, especially when it comes to starting the year. We have a great opportunity right now that it's week one of the year, right? So there's a lot of things that perhaps we didn't get right in 2020 that now we have the opportunity to get right towards the end of the year, starting now, right? So you want to start a big project, breaking it down into smaller chunks like I was talking about in my last episode. So let me tell you a little bit of the couple of things that I mean by that. One of them is, it's a few legs to it. One of them is starting your budget, right? Nobody likes the B word. I know, just like nobody likes dieting, nobody likes budgeting because it just has a negative connotation to it. Some people might feel like it's restrictive, which I understand completely. But think of it this way. Think of it more like allocation. The US government has a budget. Corporations have budgets. I believe that individuals and families should do the same. It doesn't mean that you have to be restricted, but it means that you're conscious and intentional as to where your money goes. You can have a big budget. You know, I have clients that like to travel and they spend a lot of money traveling every year. Not this year, obviously, or the year before because of COVID, but their travel budget is large and they make that intentional. They make other choices where, you know what, maybe I won't drive as nice a car because I prefer to have an experience over a material thing, right? And that's a choice, but you're being conscious about it. And there's no wrong or right. You can fit anything into your budget, no matter what that is, right? So let's talk about the budget, for example. So one of the things I always tell my clients to do is to write down a list of their expenses. The first one you should write down is usually the ones that are recurring, that are for the most part the same amount of money every month, more or less. That could be your mortgage, your rent, car payments, things like that, that sort of repeat every month. You know the dollar amount very closely. So you list those as fixed expenses. And then you have your flexible expenses, which is typically when people tend to get into some trouble. Over 90% of the budgets that I do with my clients, if somebody has ever felt like they were overspending or just didn't know where their money was going, most of the time it's not because of a lack of income. In my experience, when I've sat down with couples and I do a budget or individuals, it's very rarely do I sit down with somebody and I look at their finances and say, okay, yes, you need more income. Very rarely. Not saying it doesn't happen, but for the most part, with a few tweaks, you can reallocate either by cutting back certain things or just moving things around. There's usually a way to find room in your budget for certain things. And a lot of that has to do with prioritization and also being intentional. Like I said, a lot of us, use those debit cards thinking, hey, I'm not using credit, at least I'm not charging, which is true, but it's coming out of your bank account. And it's still very easy to just whip out the plastic, right? And just be unintentional about it. And then at the end of the month, maybe you look at your bank statement, maybe you don't, right? So going back to the budget, list your fixed expenses, then list your variable expenses. And one of the things that we tend to forget about sometimes are the things that are not bills, but that we still spend money on. So I usually have my clients give themselves a personal allowance of some sort every week that they choose to spend on miscellaneous items, personal care, going out to eat, ordering food, having a few drinks, whatever the case might be. So you don't necessarily need to agree, let's say if you're a couple, on what each of you will spend the money on, but you do agree on the amount, if you have a family budget. So if you say, you know what, we're each going to spend $75 a week on our personal allowance, fine. I can do whatever I want with that, obviously within the boundaries of your relationship. But ultimately, the purpose of this is to give you the sense of having freedom within your budget, but at the same time, having a cap on what you're going to spend, right? Because you only have a limited amount of income coming in, presumably, right? So you can't just overspend, because if you do, then that's when you get into trouble in terms of either not saving as much, dipping into your savings, maybe even charging on credit cards. That's when the trouble comes. So I tend to find that when people are budgeting and they're budgeting wrong, the one place where they tend to overspend are on the things that are not fixed. Hardly ever, or actually never, have I spoken to somebody that tells me that they send extra rent to their landlord, right? They typically just pay whatever is due. Same thing with utilities. Maybe if you have a debt like a mortgage or a car payment or credit card that you want to pay off, you send extra payments to those. But the usual fixed things like a rent payment, for example, or even a mortgage, if you're not trying to be conscious about paying the balance, usually people just send whatever it's due that month, right? So where I see that most people tend to overspend is on the amounts that are not necessarily fixed and that aren't even bills per se. And that could be going out to eat, personal care, things of that sort, which is why I say to people, if you give yourself an allowance, now you're putting a fixed cost on the miscellaneous items, and then if you don't go over that, then the budget is going to work itself out because you've already added your fixed expenses, your variable, and now you gave yourself an allowance. Now, using the very same concept, you can take, and by the way, if you don't feel comfortable using cash, usually I will tell people to use cash, at least at first, because it's a matter of developing a habit. It's very uncomfortable, obviously, if you go, say, put gas, you have to park the car in front of the pump, go out, go inside the place, maybe make a line, tell them to put $20 in pump, whatever, come back out, right? That's very inconvenient. So I understand that. So if you're not comfortable, it's inconvenient, you don't have the time or the desire to carry cash. One trick I use, and I do this with my wife as well, is we have a separate checking account where each of our allowances go into every week. So that way, that particular account and the debit card that's attached to it only has the amount of money that we've each allocated for our individual allowances. And it does not dip into the family account that is designated to pay for other bills. So that's one way around. Obviously it depends on your bank. Make sure that you are meeting the minimum requirements for that account, or that you have a bank that doesn't charge you any fees, because you don't want to carry a huge balance in this particular account anyway, because it's just simply for you to have enough of your allowance money there, right? So just make sure that you're not harming yourself just by having an account that has a $500 minimum and you only keep $300 there, and then you're paying $12, $15 a month. That sort of defeats the purpose. So you definitely don't want to do that. But that is one concept. If you don't feel comfortable with cash, create a separate checking account, have a debit card for that account that is your allowance money. And that is one great way of doing it. And, the reason I bring this up now is because it's the beginning of the year. So you have a great opportunity to say, you know what, I'm going to start my allowance fund right now. And you have, maybe you have a stimulus payment coming, maybe you don't, but tax season is around the corner. Most people get a refund, even if it's not huge. Maybe that could be a great way for you to kickstart certain accounts. And then speaking of accounts, let's get into the other accounts. Another thing that people do that it's not a bill is holiday shopping. We just went through it now. This might be a great opportunity for you to recap and say, well, how much money did I spend on holiday shopping? All right. Well, whatever that amount was, then you just want to divide that by the amount of paychecks that you get throughout the year and then save that amount. So, to give you an example, if you spend $600 on holiday shopping and you get paid every 2 weeks, then all you have to do is divide that $600 by, say, 26 weeks, and it's $23 a paycheck. So, if you say round it up to $25, by the time that holidays come next year, you would have already accumulated the amount of money that you spend on holiday shopping. So you can use the same concept where you either have a separate savings account. A lot of banks out there are also now offering a pretty cool feature within their savings accounts where you can kind of have sub accounts within your account without having to create a separate savings. So you can basically just allocate funds for different purposes. So check those out. I've seen those on some of those online banks that have high yield savings account. One of the options is to say, you know what, this is my main savings account. I want a sub account for my vacation, a sub account for my emergency savings, sub account for a home project, etc., which is great because then you get to keep track of it and you get to see how much money is going towards each goal. So breaking down those bigger amounts into smaller means it's a lot easier to save $25 every 2 weeks than it is to come up with $600 in November to go holiday shopping. That's one. The other one is vacations. Use the same concept. Obviously, a lot of us are probably not taking any vacation recently because of COVID, but at some point we expect to resume normal life, right? Or maybe you might take 2 vacations the following year because you missed on your vacation this year. So whatever the case might be, use the same concept. Use one of those sub accounts to say, okay, every year we typically spend $3,000 a year on vacation. Let's say that's the case for you. You get paid 26 times a year. So you take the $3,000 divided by the 26, and that's $115 a paycheck that you would then have to put away in order to have your $3,000 at the end of the year. Now, the great opportunity is that normally I might be sitting down to do a budget with somebody and it might already be April and their vacation's usually in July. So they don't have the time frame. But because it's the first week of the year, you have the great opportunity of getting down your budget now so that you can have most of your money going towards those different sub accounts, if you want to call them that, right? Which is great. And then if you don't have enough time for those, like let's say your vacation is in the summer, then perhaps you can use some other monies that you have already accumulated or are expecting, like a tax refund and or stimulus, to help you sort of kickstart those accounts and then continue to save every single week. Another great opportunity here is if you're already at a point where you can fund, let's say, and qualify for a Roth IRA, you're able to save $6,000 a year if you're under the age of 50. So if you divide that by 12, it's $500 a month. And you're at a great juncture in time where you can start the new year right now. You have until the tax filing deadline to contribute to the IRA for the prior year. So if you have not maxed out your 2020 contributions, definitely speak to your financial planner or your CPA so that you can perhaps take advantage of that first. But let's say that you already did your 2020 contributions. It's a great opportunity for you to put yourself on a monthly or bi-weekly schedule where you can take out an even amount and spread it out over the whole year so that by the end of the year, you would have already maxed out your contributions. And if you didn't, you still have until the tax filing deadline to contribute to the prior year. So that's a great opportunity. Even if you have not maxed out your 2020 contribution, you can, if you don't need it for other things and you're in a situation where you could, maybe use your tax refund or a stimulus payment if you qualify for it to contribute to one. So definitely consider that. So this is one of the things that I spoke about in another episode. It's the concept of SMART goals. So just going back to the whole set it and forget it thing, you don't want to forget it. Yes, you want to set it. You want to say, okay, I'm going to contribute 10% of my salary to my 401k. Um, I'm going to contribute $25 a week towards my holiday shopping. I'm going to contribute $75 a week towards my vacation fund. I'm going to give myself a $80 allowance a week. You definitely want to set it, right? Set the intention, set the goal. You don't want to forget it because although the intention behind it is great to say, okay, out of sight, out of mind, you also want to make sure that you are, in fact, getting closer to your goals. And it also keeps you motivated too. When you check in, and you say, this is great. I'm actually contributing towards my goals. I'm close to maxing out my 401k or my Roth IRA, or I'm losing the weight that I said I would, right? So let's say I use weight loss as an example because it's a common goal usually around this time. You don't want to say, hey, I want to lose 20 pounds and then just start working out and never weigh yourself again, right? Or weigh yourself in 6 months. You're typically going to do it weekly, right? You want to make sure that you are, in fact, making some sort of progress. Because if you're not, then you can determine if what's not working. And if something isn't, you can replace it with something else, change course. So you do the same with your finances. You want to do the same exact thing. It's set the goal and then check in. And that could be for building your emergency savings, paying off your debt, things like that. If you're a family or a couple, I always recommend having money dates with your significant other where you check in every once in a while, even if it's during or right before your date time. If you set a time for a date, maybe the first 20 minutes before it, you can just quickly go over your goals. And I know some of you might think, oh boy, well, if you do everything right, then this would not turn into a fight. I promise. But ultimately gives you the opportunity to be open, an environment where you both are on the same page and you're both working towards those common goals, just to check in and make sure that that is in fact happening. Because I find this sometimes too, where things change and one spouse just didn't tell the other about it. And they didn't mean to, but it might just come across as if you're hiding something and it might just cause some issues. So it's better that you're both on the same page and agree on your joint goals so that it doesn't turn into an issue later, right? Marriage is already, can be hard enough. You don't want to add more stress to it. One of the major reasons that couples fight is because of money. So these are some ways that you can definitely help reduce some of that, right? By having joint goals, by having agreements on how much money is going to go into what envelopes or buckets or however you want to designate them, what your personal allowances would be, et cetera. And then you have that joint vision. And speaking of vision, one of the things that I highly recommend, which is why I'm also against the whole out of sight, out of mind, set it and forget it, is a vision board. It's one of the things that I use every single day. I went and bought a whiteboard. I have not hung it up, but that's one of the things I want to do. But basically, it's out in my office. And I did newspaper clippings and clippings from magazines and things of that sort of things that I want to accomplish throughout the year. And then I write as well, very specific goals. So you use the SMART goal concept. It's an acronym. You want your goals to be specific. You want them to be measurable, want them to be attainable, realistic, and also time bound. So let me give you an example. Instead of just saying, hey, I want to make more money this year, it's a great goal, but how would you know if you achieved it? If I gave you $1, well, there you go, you made more money. But I'm sure that's not what you meant, right? So something more on the SMART aspect of things would be more like, all right, by July 15th, 2021, I will have saved $2,000 in my emergency savings. That's a lot more specific, right? You gave it a very specific thing that you want, $2,000 by X date. It's measurable because you can say, okay, well, to save $2,000 by then, I have to save X amount per paycheck. You can measure that, right? Every single time you get paid, you do it. And you're like, okay, I'm working towards my goal, getting closer and closer. Is it attainable? Yes. right? Because that's the other thing. You definitely want to dream big, but you also don't want to set yourself up for disappointment. So yeah, can you make $1 million this year? Absolutely. Now, how attainable or realistic is it for you? That's one of the things you have to take into consideration, right? Because you don't want to make the goal so huge that it's just completely unattainable, and then you're just going to get all disappointed, feel defeated, and just not pursue any goal whatsoever, right? So yeah, maybe it will take you longer than 1 year to make $1 million. But if you have the discipline and time on your side, you might be able to get there, right? But you have to have a plan and you have to be persistent. And then also timed, right? So you gave that goal a time. By X date, I will have such. So it's a lot easier to achieve the goals when you have them laid out that way, because you're being very intentional and you're being very proactive about it. You're not just wishing. The fact that you're writing them down makes it a goal. If it's in your head, it's a dream, it's a wish. If it's written down, it's a goal. So use that vision board in conjunction with the action and the intention behind it, and you have a much more better chance of achieving your goals. And this is where an accountability partner becomes very helpful. So that could be your spouse, a significant other, a friend, somebody you check in with, that you made those goals. Basically, you told them what you wanted to accomplish, because we're very likely to not want to let people down, right? It's very easy to maybe let yourself down compared to others, right? Because you have a reputation you want to upkeep. You don't want others to think of you as a failure. I remember when I used to work out, I had to get up at 5 a.m. with my boy Castro back in the day. And let me tell you, I got up and I was there. But had I not been partnered with him, I probably would have overslept several of those days, right? But because the fact I didn't want to let him down, I ended up not letting myself down, because I knew he was going to be there. And I was like, oh man, I got to get up. I can't just not show up, right? This was a very long time ago. But I always remember that, right? So you do whatever you need to do. And accountability partners are a great way of doing that. And you could also have professional accountability partners like financial planners. It's one of the things I do with my practice is serve as that accountability partner with my clients, where I can sit down, check in on goals over time, make sure that things are being done according to plan. And if not, just adjust the plan according to life, because that happens sometimes too, right? But if you set the intention, you have the discipline behind it, the patience, and also the ability to know when something is working or isn't, and then changing course. And just keep it in mind, which is another thing I mentioned in the last episode, that sometimes things are not going to work out for you overnight. But if you break them down into smaller chunks and with enough time and perseverance, you're going to have a much more better shot at achieving those goals. So thank you for tuning in. I have a new project that I started. It's called Latin Excellence. It is a movement. It's a clothing brand to raise awareness and just move the Latinx culture forward. I'd love for you to check it out. I'm going to put the link in the show notes. The website is latinxmovement.com. latinxmovement.com. You can also find it on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Latinx Movement. So check it out as well. I'm super excited about it. Just launched it this weekend. And I think it's something that's going to be great just to promote Latin excellence and also donate some money to causes that promote the advancement of the Latinx community. So thank you all for tuning in. I wish you a great new year. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to send me an email at luis@onmywaytowealth.com. If you have any questions, any suggestions. Also, if you want me to interview anybody that you want to make an introduction that you think might be a great fit for the audience, let me know. I'm always open to it. And also, I have several episodes where I've had authors come in who are willing to give free copies, signed copies of their book, especially now during the new year. I'm going to make a post about this on social media. I want you guys to listen to those episodes, so go to onmywaytowealth.com, go to podcasts, see the interviews that I have there with authors. They're giving away free books, great books that can help you achieve those goals during the new year. So listen to the episode. Basically, you just got to leave a review on iTunes and send me an email with a screenshot of it and your address. And I'll be sure to make sure that the first 10 people for each episode get a signed copy of that book from the author. All right. So thank you all for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next episode. Thank you for listening to On My Way to Wealth. If you have any questions, please send me an email at luis@onmywaytowealth.com. The information provided here is for information and education purposes only. The opinions expressed herein are solely those of myself, unless otherwise specifically cited. Material presented is believed to be from reliable sources, and no representations are made by my firm or myself about other parties' information or accuracy or completeness. All information or ideas provided should be discussed in detail with a financial advisor, accountant, or legal counsel prior to implementation. Thank you.